We are recording this session of it. We will share those links to the live stream. This will also be uploaded. Please share. And, I have traveled all over the country. I have gone to probably 20 different states. I've been in forums where I've had 3 people show up, and I've been in forums where I have had 300 show up. The most important thing to me is that whatever I am giving you, whatever I'm sharing with you, you share with another person, because that is how we get the word to grow and to educate people who are not with us today. I have been an attorney for 3 decades. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about myself, but most importantly, people, even just like Shakima, she found me through social media. So many of the people that I've helped have found me through social media, and they have said that because I did a video 2 years ago, 3 years ago, it was able to encourage them or teach them a little bit about the system. So Shakima approached me with the advocacy activist, and I'm very excited to be working with her, because I can't do everything, of course. I can't build platforms and create the training and do it all. So I am happy to partner with anybody who understands the vast need for child welfare reform and who wants to do something to help. Everybody has a talent or a skill. We're not all the same. And as we go through this process, that's one thing I'm going to be asking you as well. What can you do? What is your talent? What is your skill that can help make the system better? All right, so let's begin. I think. Make sure I can get oops, I am sorry. I'm having trouble. Oh, there we go. All right, so I am the presenter for today. I'm Connie Regulate. I have been around for 3 decades. I've practiced law representing hundreds of families caught up in the trap of child welfare, administrative, and legal proceedings. When I tried to protect a disabled child from a secret order, which would remove her from her mother and place her in the home of a stranger, the system criminalized me and removed my ability to protect families. Those criminal matters are resolving, but I have had to redirect a lot of my energy and attention to training and advocating, which of course I am quite willing to do. I do see as their little scheme begins to fall apart and get untangled, they're getting a little bit nervous. So I suspect they'll try to do something else as well. So just keep your eyes open for that. I have here, I'm going to take about 10 minutes, and I'm going to play for you a TED Talk by Molly McGrath. She was the head of the Child Welfare Agency in Baltimore, Maryland, and she left frustrated, and she left this message in 2014. And it's very important. I want you to listen what she says at the end. This will also give the opportunity for a few other people to join us. So please watch as I share this with you.
Volume. We can't hear it. You have to get the volume. No.
Okay. Okay, hold on. Can you not hear it at all?
No, can you? No, I can't hear it at all.
Okay, hold on 1 second. I don't know why. I'm going to try it another way. All right, let's try this again. No, you're not hearing it? Do you hear it now?
No, we still cannot hear it. Go do it on YouTube and then play it that way. But sometimes when you paste the link in, sometimes it does that. So just open it up on YouTube.
Okay, hold on. Okay, hold on. All right. So I guess from a technical standpoint, we haven't fixed that. And I'm going to share that video again here's what's important is Molly McGrath headed up the Child Welfare Agency in Baltimore, Maryland, and she talks a lot, and this was a very inspiring video to me. But at the end of it, remember, this was 2014, and she talks about the insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. And here we are in America. We are doing exactly the same thing we did for the past 10 years, and nothing has changed. And it's because we just can't seem to get past the bureaucracy and the immobility and the intolerance. We just are having difficulty getting past that. And so that's another reason why it's so important that advocates are getting together, that we're beginning to spread that word. And I will probably share that video again in a future training, just so that we all can hear once we figure out technically why we're unable to do that. All right, so let's look at the past, and why do you need to know about the past? So here is an AFCARS report. This is the official source document of the stats that are reported to the federal government. AFCARS, you can look up the data yourself, and it gives a 5-year glance. And so what you will see here, the most important number I want you to look at is this line right in the middle, the numbers served by foster care system during the fiscal year. This is the important number right here. You will see it is 685,000, 689,000, 631,000. Those are the number of children that are removed every year. And you will see this is 2017, 18, 19, 20, and 21. And if the number of foster children up here on this first line, which a lot of people say, well, there's 400,000 children in foster care. Remember, that's on one day of the year. That is September the 30th. So let's go back in time. And like I said, Molly McGrath does this presentation, and she talks about in 2014, and she talks about the inertia for change and fixing the real problems. And so we take that very same report, only we go back in time, and this is 2013, 14, 15, 16, and 17. And the numbers served by foster for the fiscal year is still well up to 700,000, as you can see right here in 2016. And the point is we have done nothing better. We still have here, you see in 2017, on September the 30th, 442,000 children who are in the foster care system. And why do we know why those children are removed? So this again is from an AFCARS report. And this is a section that tells the reason for removals. And you can see here, the number one thing on the list at 63% is neglect. However, if you go down and you look at these other categories, you see that most of these other issues have also to do with an issue surrounding neglect. Only we have right here physical abuse is 12%, and we have sexual abuse is 4%. So most of the children are not removed because of physical or sexual abuse. The neglect at 63%, drug abuse at 36%, and caretaker can't cope at 14%, which I think is a really interesting category. That means that a parent needs help. A parent needs assistance. A parent needs help. Also, you look here, child behavioral problem is 7%. What they claim is abandonment is 5%. And child disability at 2%. That means that we are not reaching out as a community, as a nation, and trying to solve some of these social issues. The time in care, again, I've looked at the AFCARS report year after year after year after year, and unfortunately, these children don't really, these numbers don't really change. This mean and median for time in care is showing you that children are spending an average of 2.5 to almost 3 years in foster care. In the life of a child, that is a lifetime. That is a really, really long time. And look over here at the time in care, and you can see 18 to 29 months, 35 months. These are the biggest numbers. The children are spending a significant time in care, even though many of those children are reunited. And also 90% of the children are under 5 years old. So we have a societal dilemma in the United States. If you look back, I consider myself a historian of children in care in the United States, and we have a pretty miserable history. So you go way back and you start looking at the 1800s and the early 1900s, and one of the first things that you see is institutionalized care for children who have significant developmental disabilities. We were putting them away in institutions, putting them in iron cages called beds, and leaving them for hours and days at a time. Of course, we had slavery, and one of the key tools that they used during slavery was to separate children from their families. This was such a psychological drain on the families that it actually gave them more and more control. A lot of people in America still don't know about the orphan trains. The orphan trains were initiated in about 1850 and continued all the way until about 1910. And this was a system where children who were living in poverty were actually picked up off the streets of the major cities, including primarily New York City, and they would be put on trains and they would be taken across the Western United States. Once they got to different train stations, they would line them up on the platforms of the train stations, and people who were living in the Western United States would select children to help them with their farm work. These are called the orphan trains. And then, of course, there's the Indian boarding schools. Again, from about 1850 or a little bit earlier, 1840 until nearly 1900. Excuse me, we had the Indian boarding schools where children were actually picked up from the reservations, removed from their families, and taken to boarding schools where their hair would be cut. They would be forced to speak English. There has been a lot of the trauma that has come from boarding schools has come out in probably the last 20 to 30 years. And then we had Georgia Tan. This also was a little video clip I wanted to share for you, but since we know technically that doesn't work, I'm going to tell you about Georgia Tan. And I'm calling her out by name because what she did was horrific, but she is not alone. There were other people who were doing the same thing that she was doing. And her scheme lasted from about 1940 until the 1950s. And she started as having what you might call a maternity home or an unwed mother's home. And, I am 71 years old, you guys, so I've been on this planet a long time. And I will tell you that I remember from the 50s and the 60s, it was such a disgrace to have a child out of wedlock that women would actually go to a home for unwed mothers and have their child and hand their child over, because it had become such a societal red letter or a societal scar that they felt the need to do that. By the time I was reaching grammar school and high school, finally people were objecting to that and rejecting that. But what happened is Georgia Tan, she was in Memphis, Tennessee, and she had taken these, she started by taking babies and having babies, and then she basically created a business where she would then make money by transferring these babies to other states through adoption. She went to a separate county. We now know she went down to Bolivar. She had a scheme going with a judge in Bolivar who would allow her to terminate parental rights and complete adoptions without going through all the proper processes. And then it got so bad, and she became so dependent on that she started taking children and picking children up off the streets. She was finally busted by somebody who went to work for her as a social worker and realized what she was doing and finally blew the whistle. But she got away with this for several decades. Oops.
I can play that video if you like me to. I have it up.
Okay. All right. If you found it, let's go ahead and do that. I can't hear it.
Can you hear the video?
I cannot hear it. But actually people can read it. So the music is kind of irritating. So just go ahead and let it play through. So Margie, I see your note. Actually, the music on this is pretty irritating. So if you just read the messages on the screen, it really gives you the best information. Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So can y'all see my screen now? I can't see me. All right. Am I back up, Shakima?
All right, go ahead.
Okay, great. All right. So finally, the orphanages. So we have had, this is 1906, an orphanage in Louisiana, but we had a series of orphanages all over the United States. And so can everybody see my screen? Because I don't have a mini view of the Zoom anymore. Are we good?
No, put it back up.
Can you see my screen? You cannot?
No, you have to put it back up because I had shared.
Okay, I'm going to have to go, hold on. Give me just 1 second, everybody. Just be patient.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Definitely, we will have a survey for those of you who have questions and need to be connected to someone that can assist you in your prospective state. That is why we're doing this, so you can be educated. And we have other forums that will teach you how to advocate for yourself. All right, your screen is back up. Just put it as a slideshow and we're ready to
There
go.
we go. Great, great. Thank you. All right. And so finally, then, of course, there are orphanages. We had orphanages all over the United States. Some were run by churches. Catholic Charities has a long, long history of having orphanages. And we were institutionalizing children. We know in America that the institutionalization of children does not work. It's America's societal dilemma. And so as this developed, or as we continued to institutionalize children up through the 50s and 60s, that was when ultimately there was a shift in society to create foster care. All right, so we're going to get in now to the nitty gritty of the development of the laws and how that interplay is between the state and the federal. So all child welfare agencies are operated at the state or county level, and there is no federal child welfare agency. However, every state depends on the infusion of federal taxpayer dollars to operate its bureaucracy. From the federal level, Federal Health and Human Services, also known as HHS, And within HHS is the Administration of Children and Families. They manage the federal funds dispersed to the states and receive annual statistical reports. They also provide what's called some technical guidance, which are basically just publications and reports. Now, when I say words like federal funds, I really hate to even use these words because it is our money. It is taxpayer dollars. This whole system is run by taxpayers. And that's part of the message I want to put out to you loud and clear. We have got to hold our agencies and the people who are getting our money accountable. And I know a lot of them. I've heard a teacher say one time that she doesn't like it when a taxpayer comes up and says, "You work for me." But that is the truth. The people who are on the taxpayers' payroll are working for us. Please remember that. Please put that in your heart and begin to speak boldly about that. So let's go back to the history of federal legislation. In 1935, the Social Security Act passed, and it included limited funds for child welfare. It created Title IV of the Social Security Act. Now, remember, the sales job for the Social Security Act to the American citizens was that this was going to be the retirement account for hardworking American citizens. It is a total separate tax. It was supposed to go into a trust fund for American citizens, but immediately when it was formed, there was a limited amount that then went out to aid children, primarily initially when the children had lost a parent to death. In 1958, amendments to the Social Security Act required the states to match federal child welfare funds if they chose to draw down federal tax dollars. This is the first hit of where the federal government says, now the initial Social Security Act that provided some money for child welfare primarily, and this is important to know, primarily went directly to the child or family. So if a child lost a parent or had a disabled parent, a stipend from the Social Security funds would go directly to that family. So in 1958, when the states were wanting this federal money to be able to operate child welfare agencies, the federal government says, now you're going to have to match those funds. Again, remember, when I say federal child welfare funds and federal tax dollars, it is taxpayer money. And I just again made a note of this, that the monies the taxpayers and the workers pay for FICA, which is the Federal Insurance Corporation Act, was intended to be placed in trust for disability and worker retirement. And those funds have been sorely invaded by Title IV-E. By 1961, there was the creation of the AFDC, or the Aid to Dependent Children. This permitted the use of Title IV funds for foster care when children were removed from homes if the child comes from an AFDC family. State participation in the Title IV-A, which was the AFDC foster care program, is mandatory. 150,000 children were placed in foster care in 1961. Okay, so I want you to make sure you understand the impact. The AFDC was created for poor families, for poor children. It was aid to dependent children. And then they created foster care and said, if a child qualifies for AFDC, they now qualify to Title IV-E funds if you take that child out of the home and put him in a stranger's home. The war on poverty existed in the 1960s and 70s, and the United States Congress took aggressive actions against U.S. citizens who were oppressed and confused after half a century of war and a century of Reconstruction. The war on poverty started removing children from poor families' homes. The war on drugs created heavy sentences of incarceration, and the war on civil rights, voting rights, prisoner rights, and parental rights began in the courts. So remember, removing the children from poor homes was part of the war on poverty. And about this time, they added to the language of anybody receiving a home or receiving funds from federal money for poverty, for AFDC. One of the requirements that they put in there was that the family have a suitable home. And of course, the government agencies who wanted to remove children could use that suitable home language to use against a parent. Of course, if they're living in poverty and they need funds, they probably also need help in housing. In 1974, there was the CAPTA legislation, which is also referred to as the Mondale Act. It is also called the Child Abuse Prevention and Services Act. Treatment Act, CAPTA, C-A-P-T-A. This act focused on prevention, assessment, identification, and treatment of child abuse and neglect, but it also put removal of children in the hands of the state court system. In this legislation, legal terms like best interest of the child, contrary to the welfare of the child, and reasonable efforts became the legal cliches to justify parent and child separation. This code, this federal legislation, was codified in 42 USC section 671 and also 45 CFR, and I've got the numbers there. And let me just explain the difference to those to you for just a second. So when you see a code or a USC, United States Code, that means it is a law enacted by Congress, and that is what is called codified. That is the language that is used. 45 CFR, the R stands for regulations. So once a bill is codified by Congress or put into the U.S. Code, the state agencies can then create regulations. The federal and state agencies, they both do it. So these are the regulations that were then created by Health and Human Services. As you begin to learn how this system works, it will also be the same on the state level. So the state level will create codes or laws passed by the General Assembly, and then those state agencies that operate those systems can create their own set of regulations. So each state was required to create a state plan under CAPTA, and that is codified in 42 USC 671. And that is where these words emerge. And I call them totally judicial cliches because the courts often do not provide supporting facts to reach these conclusions. And then as we move along, 1978, we had the Indian Child Welfare Act called ICWA. The importance of this act is that it increased the burden of proof for state agencies to take children from Indian tribes and put them in the homes of those who were not Indians. And so it was intended to protect the heritage. There was a pretty big case on this not too long ago. I don't have that case in front of me. I don't want to quote it, but recently ICWA has been challenged. I have used it and I have spoken out about it because there's actually a higher threshold for Indian children than there is for any other ethnic group, including Caucasians in the United States. And I have said that that's a violation of equal protection. In 1980 was the Adoption Assistance and Child Welfare Amendments. This is where we began to see monies for adoption as well as for foster placement. It was just the commencement of that. 1981, Congress rejected a Senate bill that would create a child welfare block grant and eliminate Title IV-E. This is really important. And the reason I want to say this is because remember, our children are monetized per head. So you have to take a child out of custody of their parent and put them in the custody of the state, and there is $1 per head to those children. what the Senate tried to do in 1981 was create a block grant, which would say basically the states would be entitled to a block of money instead of monetizing each child they remove. This is something that we are also trying to get Congress to look at again. My friend Kathleen Arthur, who also works with me in Family Forward Project and goes to Washington, this is one of the messages that she has passed out to Congress at this time. And here we know that they tried it in 1981. It was rejected. It did not pass. However, I think the time has come for this to be re-examined. 1985, the Title IV-E added the independent living program to assist children aging out of foster care. Now we know by 1985 that we've created legal orphans in the United States. The children are getting booted out of foster care and they have nobody. They have no family. They have no genealogy. There's this generational loss for them. Often they have no further association with their foster parents. And so this was something to try to begin to assist them. 1993, Title IV-B created a new family preservation and family support program. Here is, and as you learn more about this, you're going to see that we're looping back around to try to create more power, more effectiveness, more finances through the Title IV-B program, because the difference between Title IV-B and Title IV-E is 10 times. In other words, when Congress funds Title IV-B at $600 million, they're funding Title IV-E at $6 billion. So there is a 10 times gap of the money that they provide for foster services versus the money they provide for family preservation and family support. So the federal dilemma of the 1990s was that children were getting lost in foster care. Now, remember, of course, we didn't have smartphones. We didn't have computers on our desk. We didn't have all the fancy electronics that we have today. And basically, every child was a manila folder with their name on it. And children were lost across the whole entire country. When I first got out of law school in 1994, it was the following year, was the very first year that even district attorneys had computers sitting on their desk. I mean, it was the managing of data and information on people was basically a hot mess. So several federal class action lawsuits sprang up across the country, which were initiated by childrensrights.org because of children who were lost in the system, ignored, deprived, and it was a totally failed system. Tennessee, for instance, had the Brian A. case. It was a 1994 federal law for Child and Family Service Review, and it authorized the child welfare demonstration projects. So as these class actions began to spring up, and we said, oh my gosh, children are aging out, they're legal orphans, we're losing children in the system. It took a class action lawsuit to be able to initiate some change. And out of those class action lawsuits were several consent decrees that came from federal courts, including Tennessee, and there were about 20 other states that went under consent decree. And out of that emerged this 1994 act to try to authorize the child welfare demonstration projects, which meant that they could now use money to provide more in-home services before a child was removed from a home and placed with strangers. So the federal dilemma of the 1990s continued. In 1997, President Clinton signed the ASFA, Adoption and Safe Families Act. The Clintons are very proud of this. There's another video on here that's coming up in the next slide. I'll just tell you about when it comes up. But the purpose of this, they said, was to increase permanency for children. It codified post-adoption bonuses, which means it made it a law. And it provided long-term post-adoption support, and it required the states to seek termination of parental rights after 15 months in foster care. So the purpose was, and I was a lawyer at the time in 1997. I had just begun to get introduced to the foster care system. I was well aware of the Brian A. Act. I knew about the consent decrees that were coming out of the major class action lawsuits. And honestly, I will tell you that even I thought this might be a good idea. But now, as we look, how far are we after 2020, almost 20 years later, 97, 2000, 25 years later, we know that this was a bad idea, or it's bad to continue this. It might have been good at the time, but it no longer works well. And when we go to Washington, D.C., and we talk to legislative aides and we talk to legislators, I say, you know, there were a lot of things that were passed in the 1970s that don't work well today. And this is one of them. So this sped up adoptions, and it provided more money for the people who adopted after that adoption was complete. This now Title IV-E post-adoption support money has surpassed the Title IV-E foster care money because it is cumulative year after year after year. And as we looked earlier at those number of children going into foster care, the 700,000, of those 700,000 children, over 100,000 of them are going through this post-adoption process every year. So you look, that adds up. It becomes cumulative year after year after year. In Tennessee alone, this money is well over $10 million per month. That's over $100 million a year. It's also what I call the middle class welfare program that nobody talks about. This is tax-free money that is going to raise children when many of these children are removed because of poverty in the first place. All right, this video, we're not going to play it or attempt to play it. I don't want to get off track from our video, but we'll post it later, and we'll figure out a way to give you this video. But this is in 2016 when Hillary Clinton was running for president, and Bill Clinton stood up at the Democratic National Convention in support of his wife. But the most important thing, and what this clip is about, is how proud he talks about that he is that Hillary Clinton was the one who got the Adoption and Safe Families Act passed. I don't know if they're just blind. Now, remember, that's 2016. So that's 20 years after the fact. They are bragging about the termination of parental rights and the destruction of families. Oops. All right. So again, 1990s, the dilemma they were facing. In 1999, John H. Chafee created the Independent Living Program for children aging out of foster care, which provided this monthly stipend check to foster kids, college benefits, and healthcare benefits. Now, I would like to tell you that the Chafee bill was passed in commemoration of perhaps a foster child who had struggled through the system and had been able to create a life of independence. But no, it's named again about a senator, which is really unfortunate. But it is now referred to as the Chafee bill. And this provides this monthly stipend for foster kids coming out of care. And, you know, ultimately, I don't think that this is a horrible thing to do for children who have suffered through this system. But the problem is it's a perverse incentive. And I have even seen the child welfare agencies approach children who are 17 years old. And one child was even 1 month from being 18. And a DCS social worker told that child if they would agree to go into foster care and age out of foster care, that they would get a monthly allowance check from the government until they were 26 years old. They would get free college and they would get health care benefits. So let's continue. In 2001, the Promoting Safe and Stable Families was more services to the foster kids. 2008, Fostering Connections to Success and Increasing Adoptions Act was more services to foster kids, but not really stabilizing families. As you see, it is about increasing adoptions. In 2010, the Affordable Care Act extended Medicaid coverage to all foster kids aging out until age 26. And in 2010, CAPTA, this 1974 bill that I told you about, is reauthorized, with no changes, by the way. And now remember, by 2010, we're beginning to get AFCAR's reports that shows us all of the reasons children are removed. It's showing us all the number of children that are being subjected. 2018, and this is where Family Forward Project began to become active. We started activating in 2015, going to Washington, D.C., putting our heads together. I started traveling all over the United States, just speaking to groups anywhere. Sometimes it was 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and sometimes it was 300. I'm so grateful for all of those people in those different states who would put together just a presentation, a group before the pandemic. And I would just go. I just wanted to meet people. I wanted to talk to them. I wanted them to hear a voice. I wanted them to have more, feel more presence. And so in 2018, after we went up grassroots lobbying and worked and worked and worked and went up there, we pounded the pavement. We walk into offices. We plead. We take families who tell their stories, who are suffering. The Families First Prevention and Services Act passed, the FFPSA, now known as the Families First Act. The Families First Act did 4 things. I don't think I cover this in another slide, so let me, okay. Oh, nope, that's going to be in my next slide, so I'll save that a second. There was also in 2020 an executive order by President Trump to ensure the implementation of the FFA. And then in 2020, there was another bill passed, the Families First Support Act, to provide more money for the FFA. So what did the Families First Act do? There were 4 things in the Families First Act. It was a good start, but it's not good enough for many reasons I will tell you in just a moment. The state agencies could receive a $75 reimbursement for in-home services 12 months prior to removal for children who were at risk of removal. Now, 75% of a fee, such as, let's say they needed homemaker services or anger management services, or maybe even therapy. To the state agencies, this was really a pittance. They would much rather have that child in foster care. But this was an expansion of Title IV-E to allow the states to try to keep a family stable instead of separating them. The states were to phase out group homes for children, to support pregnant foster children, which is a sad state of affairs, but that's indeed where we are, and to implement a kinship navigator plan for more relative placement. So what happened? So we have resistance. It is the Titanic. This whole system is like the Titanic. And I tell people, and I talk when we go to Washington, D.C., I say, we may not be able to turn the Titanic around, but if we could just move it 3 degrees, maybe we could keep it from hitting the iceberg. There are power struggles. There are greedy contractors. There's job security. There's adoption incentives or adoption bonuses. There's perverted incentives. And this is part of what Molly McGrath talked about as well in 2014. And so that resistance is refusal to implement. The contractors are afraid of losing money. There's less foster, there's less jobs. The post-adoption now surpasses the foster funds. There's no bonuses, and there would be a loss of agency income. And so the state agencies see the implementation of the Family First Act as a sinking ship to their bureaucracy. Okay, that's Molly again. We're going to pass her up. All right, so the Family First Plan. So I have also complained since 2018 when this bill was passed. They were supposed to implement the plan by October of 2018. That deadline got pushed back and pushed back and pushed back and pushed back. So the final deadline, the ultimate deadline, was supposed to be October of 2022. Here's a little map that I found that talks about whether or not the states are implementing it. So you see the white states, they are jurisdiction with no Family First legislation or Title IV-E plan. So the difference in that is that the state legislators can actually enact a law for the implementation of Family First, or the state agency can just put together a plan that complies with Family First. The green states are the states that have enacted Family First legislation, which is critically important that we do that. And you see there we have Alabama, Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, and California. And then the blue is the jurisdictions with approved Title IV-E prevention plans, which you can see those northeastern states of Vermont, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, West Virginia, Ohio, Indiana, Tennessee, North and South Carolina, Georgia, Florida, also Utah and Idaho. And then the orange are the jurisdictions that enacted legislation and have approved plans. And although that appears to be a majority of the states, we're still getting reports that a lot of the states are not implementing it within the agency. So as you saw, Tennessee supposedly had a Title IV-E plan. I say it's a lie, because here's the published plan for Tennessee. If you click on the link on that interactive map on the website, you come to Administrative Policy and Procedure 16.36 and look under the authority section there. And do you see any reference at all to the Family First Act? You do not. And if you read through that entire policy, which I have, they really are not enforcing and supporting Family First. Now, I just want to talk about, we're going to go further in other presentations about our current state, but I just want to put out there and plug in a few things about where the reports are coming from. You see here that legal and law enforcement personnel and educational personnel are the top two categories, which are nearly 50%. If you add medical personnel, you've got well over 50% of the reports are coming from education, legal, law enforcement, and medical. And at some other point, we'll talk about teachers and reports and truancy and increasing their funds. Now, earlier I showed you the statistics on the number of children. Look here, here's another example of we just can't seem to get it right. This is 2017, 18, 19, 20, and 21. And these are the referrals, and you'll see there is really no change. The screened in referrals, again, it's about the same, which means those are the referrals. When I say a referral, that means a phone call of an allegation of abuse or neglect. And then the disposition means that they acted on it and they did something. And you see that there are still, out of all the calls that come in, that only about a third of those are considered receiving a disposition. And again, here's another example. I want you to look first at the child population of reporting states. And I want you to see, it's very interesting that in the United States, we actually have a decrease in child population. We have gone from 74 million to 72 million in the United States, which is really kind of frightening if you think about just the future of our country. And the over here, the rounded number of children who received an investigation or alternative response continues to be about 3 million, although it looks like it has decreased just a little bit, but it could be because they say they don't have enough money, and we'll get to that as well. So the point of this I want to show you, and I want your minds to begin to churn on this, is what are we doing wrong? What are we doing wrong? Now, this also shows you that of all of those reports that come in, I want you to look at this number right here. This number right here shows you that 56% of the reports that come in are unsubstantiated. Unsubstantiated means that there was an investigation, although albeit I often complain about the types and their abilities to do investigations, that 56% of those investigations are unfounded, unsubstantiated. The victims right here are 17% of those calls. So what are some of our problems? Of course, I've already mentioned it. I'm going to lay it out again because we have to learn about the contractors. We have the law and money entanglement. We have private contractors. We have state taxpayer money. We have federal taxpayer money. We have adoption bonus incentive money, which means that the states get a bonus check for every child they adopt out. And we just barely brushed on that. But that 1997 Adoption and Safe Family Act provided at first a $4,000 bonus, and now it's up to a $10,000 to $12,000 bonus to the state agency for every child they adopt. And of course, there's the post-adoption continued monthly payments, which I've already talked to you about. So we're faced with this huge bureaucracy. The state agencies now depend on these federal tax dollars to maintain the expansive network of employees and contractors. For instance, in Tennessee, a population of 6 million people has 3,900 DCS employees and 185 contractors. And, you know, Tennessee has about 9,000 children in foster care and 3,900 employees. I want you to just look at that ratio. And I'm going to bring up a little bit more about the operations of that agency. And I know as you watch this, you're watching from all over, from Florida, from Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, California. The problems are consistent across the entire United States. I happen to watch Tennessee more because I do try to educate our people at the state level on these problems. I want you to become empowered and educated so that you can help me in your particular states tell these stories as well. All right, the people, there's this vast bureaucracy of top-heavy bureaucracy with pencil pushers that strive to keep power. Oh my gosh, and I missed that screen. Okay, I'm not sure if you could see it. I accidentally hit my screen there, but that was a little screen of a social worker who made a post on social media who said that how easy it was for her to take children away from parents. So in 2021, there was a culture survey with the Department of Children's Services, and here's a few things of what the staff has said. It said one of the employees said, I would seek employment elsewhere if my tenure were shorter. We are led by administrators who only value each other. Nepotism and discrimination are the real problems in this agency. No one is concerned about resolving the serious issues in this region. I'm committed to making a difference in the lives of children and family. The administrators here just boss each other around and try to please each other. It is not the work necessarily that's draining. It is when the company you work for treats you and other coworkers who don't work as hard, treats other coworkers who don't work as hard or care about children within the community and cannot ever be a team player. It's always causing strife. It's when constantly those workers are allowed to do whatever they want. It is when you work so hard for a kid and you're told no to any kind of court order when you know something is wrong, but the kid is too afraid to say anything. It's when you start wondering why you fight for children at all. The failure to solve the problem and the social issues cause the children to interstate custody. That has never been addressed. One of the workers says it's unsafe. I believe it's unsafe for employees to transfer delinquent and behavioral teenagers in their personal vehicles. And I want you to think about that. And I have been personally faced with this dilemma before when you were afraid that a child might jump out of your car, and these social workers are being faced with that. It's most upsetting what I see is the multi-generations of clientele in DCS custody. I have found around for almost 30 years that I am not seeing DCS clientele getting out of poverty in spite of spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on an individual. I often fail to see the point of DCS or social service organizations in general. DCS is very well funded. It has double figures, layers of management, but the programs appear to be inefficient and wasting taxpayer money. Through high participation in a 401k, other investments, plus having a pension, I have managed to climb into the 97th percentile of wealth, but I figure my career has been a waste. Now, I am going to show you some other people who have spoken out. I am not alone in the message. There are some very highly educated people who are attorneys, who are social workers, professors. Here's one book by Laura Briggs called Taking Children. And she talked about Florida and Tennessee being the first states to take children and punish Black women for civil rights rebellion. She also talked about Florida and Louisiana welfare requirements, including a suitable home and prohibited benefits to illegitimate children. If you want to learn more and be just kind of have this broader knowledge and be a historian of the offenses that we've raised against children in the United States, Laura's book is really good. I've read the whole thing. Another good book is Shattered Bonds by Dorothy Roberts. She talks about AFSA supporters place children's rights to be safe in opposition to parents' rights to have custody of their children. These statements follow a very common habit of contrasting parents' rights and children's rights. This way of framing the issue assumes that parents and children's interests are in opposition to each other, and it assumes that only parents, not children, have an interest in family integrity. The message there being it is also important for children to have integrity. Again, another book I would highly recommend. Dorothy Roberts is a professor at a university in the East. I'm not sure where it is right now. I believe it's Pennsylvania, but I'm not sure, but it's a very good book. And actually, I've read this book in spattered parts because when I read this book and I read 3 or 4 pages at a time, it sounds like me talking. And so I'm like, okay, this is just me. This is just me. But she gives that message and it will help you know the right language when you want to talk about these issues. Here's another book called Injustice, Inc. This is a frightening book. I've read this whole book. It's by Daniel Hatcher. He is also a professor. He also wrote The Poverty Industry right before he finished this book. And he said, because the process of maximizing Title IV funds from children can be confusing, many Ohio juvenile courts hired a private revenue contractor called Justice Benefits, Inc. JBI is incentivized by receiving a percentage of the money claimed through children, 22% of the monies recovered from federal funds. All right, now let me explain this to you. Number one, I have read this book from cover to cover. It's a very short book. It's only about 150 pages, very well documented. It was written by an academician who has sourced every fact that he has put in the book. As much as I know about federal funding, this book made me shudder. And it made me shudder because he really gets down to the monetizing of children in foster care, the children going through family courts, through Title IV-D, and the children who are going through our juvenile justice system. It is frightening. So what he is saying here, that this company, Justice Benefits, Inc., as soon as a child comes into the jurisdiction of a court, in other words, the child is just present in the court, whether it's because of a divorce, whether it's because of delinquency or unruly, or a DCS case or a paternity case, as soon as the child is under the jurisdiction of the court, the court and the agency can report that child's name, social security number, and date of birth to an agency like Justice Benefits, Inc., who now creates this entire profile of every possible scenario of where they can get federal tax dollars on this child. And then Justice Benefits, Inc. takes 22%. I mean, they are total mercenaries. And the fact that there is a company that can be profitable by monetizing our children is frightening. Also, he talked about cities and towns using juvenile jails to spur economic development and generate government revenue. Detained children are essentially bought and sold as for-profit juvenile facilities are purchased by large private equity firm, real estate investment trust, and other companies traded on the stock market. Large private entities structure themselves as nonprofits while generating millions in revenue from vulnerable youth. And I know juvenile justice is a bit different from foster care, but this past year in 2022, I ran for juvenile court judge in my community because I was well aware of the monetizing that was going on through juvenile justice. And in my very county, they were starting to publicize that they were putting $156 million into a juvenile justice and jail center in my community, which I would say is a pretty sophisticated community and more of a high-end, higher educated community, because they wanted to detain and house more children. In this juvenile facility, there were to be 43 mental health beds. And let me tell you what that means to children being monetized. It means that those children could be adjudicated as severely emotionally disturbed by a juvenile court judge. And then that juvenile court judge could monetize those children up to $500 a day and detain them in the facility, or $17,000 a month. For 43 beds, just think about the profit that could be incurred. The same thing is happening with foster children who are being monetized not only by the state, but by the private agencies. One last book I want to introduce you to is Martin Guggenheim's What's Wrong with Children's Rights. Martin Guggenheim, bless his heart, he's at least my age. He's probably a little bit older than me. He's been talking the talk for decades now, and he wrote this book really talking about children's rights. What are the children's rights? The government bureaucracies and personal political institutions, in the language of the Supreme Court, have been criticized for being inept at many functions, because childbearing requires exquisite attention to each child's special needs. We should expect state officials would be particularly bad at raising children. And, one of our commissioners in Tennessee finally admitted the state is a bad parent. All right, finally, we are closing up this session. I just wanted to give you an introduction of some of the future trainings and presentations that we'll be putting together and what some of those topics may look like. So we need to talk about laws, rules, and policies. What is the difference and how do those apply to you? The people and players in the process in court, the process out of court, what you need to do to prepare, how you can help your attorney, what happens in court, your expectations, what changes are in process, what changes do we need. You can be an advocate too. Being an advocate, being a lobbyist, being an organizer, being a researcher, and understanding state legislative lobbying. All right, so thank you all for your patience, and that is the end of my formal presentation. And I don't know if any of you have presented questions in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, I'm going to let